Right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Mark Gotelli. It's June 5th, 2024. We're at Heavenly Creatures in Portland. And Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me to chat.
First question, as you know, is why wine?
I've been thinking about this since you invited me to chat today. And I think it comes down to two things. One, somewhat more abstract, even if kind of well-regarded, like quality of wine production and wine culture is like a very unique relationship to time. The temporal element to the right moment, these fleeting moments that are always around you in wine production. I have very meager experience helping with wine production, but you of course always hear winemakers talking about the right time to pick, the right time to make adjustments or corrections if you need to do that sort of thing, the right time to bottle. And then on the consumption side, the right time to open a bottle if it's an age-worthy wine, the right time to start drinking the wine, how long to let it settle, let it open up, etc. And that there are all these continuously fleeting moments, and that you have to strike while the iron's hot. You have to be very perceptive and a little lucky. And if you get all of that lined up, you can have these moments of like very revelatory beauty and experiences that can be unique in that way, and unique for being in that specific moment. And I think that it's a well enough regarded thing in the wine world to notice that about both production and consumption. But it hits me, it truly resonates. And so if I'm being honest, I think that that's something that like gets the romantic gears turning for me. That was something I didn't realize when I first started appreciating wine. But after a while of appreciating wine, it was something that I think really got me going. And that's when I realized that was when I feel like I truly got the wine bug, so to speak. And then the other thing is, I think sales or engaging with wine on like a sales level, there's an element of like a whole taxonomy and learning a whole new set of categories that you need to apply to this really ancient craft that is ever changing. And I think that is something that just naturally resonates with me. I first got into wine, I think, in my early 20s, when I was about 21 or 22. I had, been drinking wine for a while already, but swill, mainly just taking swigs out of a bottle with friends at parties, that sort of thing. But with my first restaurant job when I was an undergrad in California, where I'm from, I started to engage with much more European wine, first of all, which I liked right away. And of course, you have to start learning about regions as opposed to just varieties. And I like that. I like to try and use a geographic understanding of what a wine is, as opposed to just talking about it with the base product. And cataloging the like trajectory of wine. It pertains to specific cultures. Just got me going. And I was studying literature and art at the time, and I'm sure that this is a common enough story, honestly, but like, and it fell very much into sync with those same studies. so those are like I think the fundamental parts of it that like resonate with me at, I don't know if it's a natural level or whatever, but it gets me regardless. So I was working at that job, my first restaurant job. It was at a small pizza spot called Pizza Antica in the Bay Area, in the suburbs of the East Bay. There are a few of them. There were a few of them at least. The one where I worked in Lafayette, California, still exists, and they had a decent wine selection. They had a lot of Kermit Lynch, which you could do worse for starting out, that's for sure. And we were able to buy wine at cost, which was great. Obviously, I was 21 years old, so there's obviously an interest in just like enjoying the wine, getting a little buzz going, etc. But I would take bottles home at cost and enjoy them with my roommates mainly. I was living in Berkeley at the time, and and I remember the first time my roommate. He was a musician, and he would always be, when I got home, he would always be watching Always Sunny with a blunt, in true Berkeley fashion. And so, you know, I would bring home some wine, he would share what he had, I would share what I had, we would have some yucks over Always Sunny, and something about the way the blunt would negate the harsh tannins of like a young Barolo, or like the rippin' acid of like cheap Trebbianos I would bring home or whatever, got me as well. I felt like I could finally like taste the fruit in a way that that was meaningful, and I'm sure my muddled mind at the time just thought, let's enjoy this, you know. And so I don't know. I've never tried the experiment again since then, but that was also something that like I think opened up like a lot of the like appreciation for just the beauty of it, you know.
Just another thing to thank Danny DeVito for. That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, seriously.
So tell us a little bit about life before wine. You mentioned California. Tell me about where you're born and raised and kind of path to college, I suppose.
I grew up in Walnut Creek, which is a suburb among suburbs in the East Bay of California. It's kind of a normal suburban life. I hated the suburbs from the moment I was about 13 years old, and started taking BART into Berkeley and San Francisco, and I knew that I wanted to get out of the burbs pretty much immediately. But I mean, in retrospect, there are lots of like comforts and that I'm thankful for at the same time. But yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world, as many people know. So it was a great place to live. But as soon as I was in my early teens, I was bopping off to mainly to Berkeley and San Francisco to enjoy more of the cultural elements of those cities and the Bay Area in general. Got really into like seeing theater, going to concerts. When I was a teenager, I was in bands, really shitty rock bands, like screamo bands, you know. But we had fun, and we would kick around Northern California playing shows and stuff like that. And it probably like kept me sane, if I'm being honest, for those years. Played some sports, mainly a runner. Went to a private Catholic school called De La Salle. That was fine at best. It's a big old sports school, but like I said, I focused mainly on music. Then I went down to UC Santa Cruz for a couple years. I was there, I realized or I've learned in the past couple years, I was there, I think at the same time as a lot of other wine professionals in the town here. Brent Braun, Sammy over at Negociant, and Bar Diane. She was there. Lisa from Chaussee. Who else did I? Nina from Nina and Dennis from Sunflower. It's just funny. It seems like there was a little something happening. In any case, spent a couple years there. I was studying philosophy and English lit with the intention of being a philosophy professor. That was what I wanted to do from like the age of 16. I transferred out and went to Berkeley, UC Berkeley. Kind of shook off the philosophy dreams when I realized that I was decent at studying the history of philosophy, but everyone around me actually could like create theories. And it's like, holy shit, how do you guys like, I don't know, there are a lot of sharp people, and it was a pleasure to be around them, but I pretty much knew I wasn't gonna do the philosophy thing long term. But in the meantime, learned that I could do like literary studies really well, which I was a big reader at the time. I feel half illiterate these days, but I was a big reader and loved literature, and I realized the like theoretical components of literature and aesthetics, like art, really got me going. So I focused more on that, and yeah. In the meantime, was working at that restaurant. This is a common enough story as well, I'm sure. But you graduate with that sort of background, and I think you find yourself kind of looking for what the next step is. And I didn't want to go to graduate school right away. I just hung around in that. At that small restaurant, kind of floating for a few years. They had a cool program. After a while, when I was about 22 or 23, where you could take the first couple levels of the Court of Masters, and they would reimburse you for the expense if you passed. And so when I was, I think it was 22 or 23, they encouraged me to do it because I was already decent at selling wine there at that restaurant. There were small like contests and things that they would have, and I would often sell the most wine, sell the most expensive wine, and I was even encouraged by a lot of the clientele we had, who kept telling me that I should be working at like a restaurant in San Francisco, or something like that, or try to up my game. But at the time, I wasn't really thinking that I would work with wine long term. So I was happy with Floating and Always Sunny and all the other trappings of like whatever it is, misguided early 20-something, partying around the Bay Area. So like they were encouraging me to take the Court of Masters, and a lot of people were encouraging me to take the Court of Masters, but I didn't have the money to front to take the classes, and I asked my mother at the time to front me the money, and she's pretty anti-alcohol generally speaking, and so she essentially told me that there's like no way that she would contribute to what she saw as like a debauched lifestyle, etc. So I think that honestly embarrassed me at the time, and so I just kind of, especially since I wasn't thinking I'd work in wine long term, forgot about it. I ended up going to law school instead. So
debauched lifestyle.
Yeah, no kidding. Saved my money for a little bit, took the LSAT, did okay at that. Found myself in Syracuse, New York, going to law school in the freezing cold, literally trudging through a cemetery of snow, knee-deep snow, to class every morning, and quickly learned that wasn't for me. And you know, I enjoyed wine at the time. Still, I think even at that point, I was in my mid-20s, that that it would just be like a lifelong appreciation sort of thing. So I'd kick around to some of the Finger Lakes wineries, and never found a good one while I was there. I've only found good ones since then, and they're killer wines you can get from the Finger Lakes, but I could not find them there. There was not really much holding me to the place when I decided to ditch law school. So it was either to move to New York City at the time, or to move to Portland, where my sister had moved 2 years prior or so. And so I did the economic thing and moved out to Portland. I had visited since my sister had moved here before I had. I would visit the valley often enough. I learned to love Willamette Valley wines when I was working at Pizza Antica, and like I kind of alluded to earlier, it was European wine primarily that really got me going. Daniel Chotard, Sancerre, and Epaulet, Riverdee, learning like what real minerality was in wine. I remember having like Tempier Rosé for the first time when it was much easier to get, and even a small little suburban pizza spot could get some. And just enjoying that a lot more. And, having been in California, I was used to extracted, oaky, big wines, and I figured out pretty quickly that wasn't my jam. But that Willamette Valley Pinots, even then, or especially then maybe, in, what was that, like 08, 09, were the closest thing that I could find to that European style, and I appreciated that. And so when the time came to decide whether to go to New York and do the fun thing, fun if impractical thing, or Portland, the somewhat safer decision, I thought about, the valley, and I thought about the wine world here, and I thought it was something that I wanted to explore a little bit more. If not like 100%, to work with the wine, or to really engage with the production side of things or whatever, at least just to have it close by and figure out a little bit more what it's all about. And yeah. I started working at Gruner, if you remember Gruner, at 12th and Alder, RIP, back in those days, where met awesome people like Greg Cantu, who's over at Quantrell now, Dana, Frank had just left, Kate Anderegg, who works for Petit Monde. It was a great little crew of people who fostered some of those early interests and liked to open up cool bottles. I could keep going, but it would just become like a
travel log.
Just like, yeah, exactly.
No, it's all good. So you're in wine, but not like all the way in wine at this point. You're kind of like, you're interested in it, but you haven't really committed to being in wine. So tell me about, like, was there like an aha moment for you, or was there like I need to see this through. I need to be in.
Yeah. Aside from the Always Sunny moment.
Aside from that one.
Frankly, I don't know. At the time I was going to school again, I moved to Portland thinking I wanted to learn how to play the trumpet and paint all the time, and that I would go to graduate school for lit, and I would become a lit professor, and life would be beautiful, and I would be happy for the rest of my days. I never even bought a trumpet, nor tried to learn how to play one. Gave up painting pretty quick when I when I found a good group of friends in town who certainly painted a lot better than I could. Went to a master's program at PSU, which was a lot of fun. Cool professors, good program. I'm not even sure if they have the graduate school program anymore at PSU for literature. But I did decently well. But my graduate school advisors were always telling me, you do good work, but you got to be realistic about what the future holds for someone with your ambitions. Even if you do get a tenure track job at in a department somewhere, you'll likely be in the middle of the country if at best. And maybe you don't want to read scholarship about, I was studying romantic poetry. Maybe you don't want to read scholarship about modernist poetry for the rest of your life, just be realistic about what your perspective is on all of this stuff. So I hit a snag getting into a PhD program, and I was burnt out on school at that point. And I had been working at a bunch of places at that point, St. Jack included. I'd met Joel over at the original St. Jack. We worked together there for a little bit, and he had me start selling the Cooper's Hall kegs. After a while, when I was looking for something to do after the master's program, and so I did that for a bit, and this whole time I was meeting winemakers through that community, meeting some shop owners, meeting just people in the community. The Portland or the Oregon community is so tight-knit and approachable that it was just nice to meet people who had really wonderful interests in what they were doing, and passionate about what they were doing. And so I'd help out with harvest here. I'd help on a bottling line there. Had been working in restaurants, so I was exposed to some nice bottles, but I didn't really make it all concrete for myself. I think it still was just a little bit of a nebulous interest, one that I was very passionate about myself, I think, to a certain degree, but I hadn't honed in any sort of way whatsoever. And I'm not sure if an aha moment ever really came. I think it was through the constant engagement with it, and after a while working with wine in a more focused way, when I eventually took over the wine program at Loch St. Jack, the short-lived Lake Oswego location for St. Jack, which was great. That I really started to focus in a way that is probably more meaningful. But I'm not sure if there was ever a light bulb that went off, honestly, aside from the early sparks.
Let's talk about the education component for you. Obviously, not formal education, but obviously learning a lot, restaurants and meeting winemakers, and obviously having mentors along the way. So tell me about the learning process of wine for you. How did you learn about wine? What were the kind of the sort of the key components for that, and what kept you wanting to learn more?
I think it's so many different people, honestly. Like I said, the community is so tight-knit that it's just gleaning what I could from people who really knew their shit, as far as I could tell, in settings where I'm learning, where I'm learning, to just listen and absorb when people are when knowledgeable people are talking about what they do and do well. So I just tried to stay receptive to that sort of thing, both in restaurants where there were always very knowledgeable people around me, and then around production when I would be helping out for a couple days here and there with harvest. I was kicking around with my buddy Sterling Whitted from Holden. I know you've done an interview with him quite a bit, and so learned quite a bit from him. Certainly learned quite a bit from Joel. If there's any Joel Gunderson, I maybe should say his name completely, just so everyone knows who he is. But if I have like a set mentor, it certainly would be him. But it was, I don't know, it was always conversational more than anything, you know. You'd open up some bottles and you'd have a conversation, sometimes about wine, often about other things. With me and Joel early on, it was often about literature or movies or whatever the hell we'd be talking about or was on our mind. And you get to know, I think, your relationship with the wine almost better through those casual conversations, and then you can, you know, look stuff up if you need to, ask questions if you need to, but it felt more fun that way. It felt more meaningful that way, I think. I like to read, you know, like I mentioned, I was bookish when I was younger, and I think like I liked to read about wine. It's funny. I mentioned how I would win little competitions at that restaurant early on, and one of the prizes that I got was a signed copy of Adventures on the Wine Route from Kermit Lynch. Like I said, Kermit Lynch focused program, to say the least. And so I read that, and that got my wheels turning. I remember Sterling turned me on to Emile Pinaud early on, so getting that kind of old school, but that very French outlook on wine became like a kind of a nice foundation for me, and then just whatever else I could get my hands on. So I think I would supplement a lot of those just casual conversations, casual nights of opening up some bottles, with just learning about things at my own pace and in my own way. So yeah, I think that became my somewhat formal education. But honestly, I feel like I'm still a student of what I'm doing, and I feel very, I think, comfortable in that role. It's funny how I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say posturing necessarily, but there's like a, you know, wine can be, I think people are always looking to be a bit of an authority on what they're talking about with wine, and some people very, very much are, you know, but I'm usually comfortable not taking that authoritative role and more just having a conversation, and I think I try to apply that approach here at Heavenly Creatures to just don't try and pontificate about what you're drinking or the bottles that you have, but just have a conversation with people about what they're interested in and what they want to drink that night. So yeah, it feels like a more comfortable role for me than being like the word from above or something like that.
Maybe it's good that you weren't a professor then.
Yeah. Seriously.
Tell me about building a wine list then. Obviously, you mentioned eventually taking over the St. Jack and being the wine buyer, wine crew.
Yeah.
Tell me about what goes into building a wine list for you. What are you looking for? What is important, and what are the kind of the through lines for you when it comes to choosing wines for a place like that?
That's something that I think it's something I think about all the time. If you get like allocated some beautiful bottles, some from wonderful producers, those can be a no-brainer. You bring those on if you can afford them. You try and build a list that includes those like no-brainer bottles to a certain degree, and then you get adventurous with some of it. You try and find some bottles that are approachable both in price point and in terms of style. And you try and have your own outlook on wine to a certain degree, but without forcing anything. And hopefully you create a balance over the course of the full list. St. Jack was obviously French focus. At Lac St. Jack, I was almost buying exclusively French wine, except for glass pours, which would usually be reserved for local wine. And here we're French dominant. I kind of liked the constraint at St. Jack of being 100% French, because there's obviously a lot of ground that you can cover within those parameters. These days, I think about trying to show both where French wine primarily, but wine in general has been, where it is, and where it's going, to some degree, from my very modest perspective. So having some of those, again, those like no-brainer bottles that usually set a good. They tend to be well-regarded producers, of course. So people who have producers who showcase what a region has done or is doing in the moment, and then some, I don't know. I don't want to necessarily go down the like natural wine rabbit hole, but like some more forward-thinking producers who are shaking things up a little bit, might be divisive stylistically even, and then you see how and where that works, and the audience that you develop around each of those different styles and each of those categories.
How much does your personal wine preferences play into that? How much is your personality is reflected in a wine list?
I'd imagine plenty, but at the same time, I'd like to think not much. Tasting wine constantly, and I should mention, honestly, one invaluable part of creating a nice wine list, in my opinion, is just having a community of people who are selling you good wine, and a community of people who are, giving you their knowledge and input about what is worthwhile and what experiences they've had with producers. So certainly from a buying standpoint, having good distribution reps who are thoughtful about what they put in front of me too is important. I seek out certain things, but at the same time, so much of the list, certainly so much of the glass pour side of things is comes from tasting things with reps and seeing what fits. But when I taste, I like to, you have kind of like almost like a checklist of like, are there flaws? If there are flaws, how are they working with the profile of the wine? Is that acceptable? Is it not acceptable? Like, how does that fit our clientele, the audience that we've cultivated, and who very graciously come and spend what time and money they have with us, like, how are we meeting them halfway? How are we being representative of the style of wine that we serve here? And then I feel like at the end of it all, it's like, and do I like it? So I try to keep that kind of as buried as possible, I think, compared to the rest of it. Because I drink like mainly, like in my free time, I drink mainly white wine. I think I do like cleaner styles, though I'm happy to get adventurous. And that can't be a whole list, that's can't even be like a fraction of the list. So you gotta suppress that to a certain degree, I think. I'd imagine, like with most things, your style and preference and your lens comes through regardless. But I don't know. I hope not too much.
So let's talk about this place then. Tell us about Heavenly Creatures and about sort of how it got here and how you got to it.
Heavenly started because Joel had this space up here in the front of his second Cooper's Hall events location, kind of lying fallow. So like I said, I work for Cooper's Hall, which is a winery event space. They used to do nightly dinner service as well. They've dialed that back quite a bit at this point. But during the pandemic, they acquired a second events location here on Broadway, which used to be Jose Cheza's restaurant, Cheza, paella focus spot. And in this little corner of the restaurant, he had 180 Churro, which is a little churro bar, much loved in the neighborhood here. And then our friends from the Nightwood Society took it over after he left. And then when they were done using the space, they handed it off to Joel at Cooper's Hall. And the space that was the churro bar kind of wasn't going to much use, mainly being used as storage, and Joel, being the practical person that he is and fun-loving person that he is, he wanted to open up a small wine bar. At the time, I was at Lac St. Jack. He and I were good friends, and we had been talking about the program even before it opened for probably a year, 6 months or so. And I was just talking to him about it as a friend, back to the same, like, opening up some bottles, tasting through things, chatting with him about what direction he might want to go with both the selections here and the format of service, that sort of thing. And then when Lac St. Jack closed up, it was very coincidental how well it lined up with the opening of this place. So I jumped on. It was really just me and Joel at first when we first opened up, along with Aaron Barnett of St. Jack, who had built out the menu at that point. And we built a small team from from there on. It was fun to just be kind of like a scrappy set of like 3 people, then 4 people. We were only open till 9 o'clock on at first. Then we saw that there was like people wanted us to be open later. We got a good reception, and then people were really appreciative, I think, of what we were doing, and we were certainly appreciative of them. So we started building things out a little bit more. Got a proper kitchen team in. The menu shifted a bit. Joel and I really were making the selections together for a while, but that dude gets busy, and I took over things about, I don't know, almost a year ago at this point. But we work hand in hand, you know, and I think that speaks to that kind of more conversational way of that we try to do things here. I don't think of like, you know, I guess, you know, I'm the wine director here, but I hate titles. I don't like to throw that around. And when I think about like the relationship I have with everyone else who works here, there are a lot of people who have tons of experience working with wine. We have you know, Maddie Colston, who of Colston Biblio, who's a somm in Chicago for years. Simon Lowry, who I think doesn't need any introduction at all, picks up shifts with us often enough. And these people, you know, they know a lot of these producers as well as I do, if not better in many regards. So it becomes more of a conversation about what these producers are bringing vintage to vintage, and what we can do to introduce our clientele, our guests, to the cool wine that we have, you know. And in the meantime, I just try and stay focused on the like nuts and bolts of it, and making sure that I can do what I can do to make sure that we open every day. And I don't know, I mean, I don't want to lose the forest for the trees ever, but so much, I'm sure you're aware, I'm sure anyone who watches this is aware that so much of running a restaurant it's just the day-to-day struggle with usually small things. The fridge is on the fritz. This delivery didn't show up, etc. You know, so you try and like maintain a balance, but often you're a little bit in the weeds with that stuff. You know, so much for titles, I guess. Yeah.
Tell me about the, I guess, sort of outside of the wine, I guess the ethos of the place. What, food-wise, event-wise, clientele-wise, what's special about Heavenly Creatures?
I think the most special thing, aside from the wine, is just we try to be really, I guess, genuine, I guess, about like being hospitality forward, and like hospitality being distinct from like service steps, you know, like we try not to be robotic in what we do. Not to say that like, I don't know, sometimes I go to restaurants and like I'm absolutely blown away by like how a fairly like formal set of service steps can come across as like amazingly professional and polished and cool, and that's great. And we don't do any of that aside from trying to make sure that like there's silverware in front of people when the food shows up. But otherwise, I think we just try and like invite people in like warmly and in a way that that expresses how much we really want people to be here and sharing experiences with us. One of our first reviews that we got in those early days when it was just kind of a scrappy 2 or 3 of us or whatever, was that it felt like a cool house party where like the wine and the food was awesome and everyone was so friendly, et cetera, and it just felt like a party. And that I was so appreciative of that, because like I think that's the setting I would want to be drinking wine in, or enjoying a small meal in, or whatever.
Stepping aside from wine for a moment, I know obviously you have a career in poetry as well. I'm curious to hear a little bit about that.
Career's maybe a touch of an overstatement these days, unfortunately. But yeah, Joel and I collaborated on some poems a few years back. He has this Lenten tradition of doing kind of making an extemporaneous poem every day of Lent. I think he skipped it this last year, but he was doing it. He did it for 4 or 5 years in a row, and I, for a time, would transcribe them. But there was an agreement between the two of us that I would try to transcribe them in any way I wanted, including adding lines, omitting lines, shaking things up the best I could. Joel has a way with words, so there wasn't too much in the way of editing, but we had a lot of fun collaborating on those sorts of things. We were actually just talking about it last night, how we need to get going on some of that stuff again. But his friend was kind enough to publish us in his small literary journal, so that was great. Aside from that, I've written poetry since I was a teenager. A lot of it really bad, and certainly none of it accepted by any journal that I would submit to. But yeah. I unfortunately hardly have the time for it these days, and it really is unfortunate, because I mean it's kind of like getting caught in the weeds of the day-to-day of a job. You unfortunately lose those the moments of reflection sometimes, and you don't have the time or like mental space or energy to really distill things down the way that I think you need to for good poetry, or good writing in general. Though I do hope to take it up again. It's funny though. I do think, and sorry to keep bringing it back to wine.
Please, no.
But I do think that like a lot of what I'm not even sure if I can articulate this entirely, but a lot of what I wanted to pursue in, say, an academic career, at least right now, like sated by trying to work with wine and understand wine and the history of wine the best that I can. And I think that even some of my artistic or creative pursuits right now are satisfied by understanding the best that I can, understanding wine as well as I can. And some of that has to do with getting back to that, finding those moments of like transient beauty that you can have with wine. And by exploring what others have done to try and chase the same thing.
I'm curious about you mentioned hospitality earlier, and I remember when I talked to Joel, hospitality was a big thing. We talked a lot about hospitality in this interview because I was so curious about he had an interesting definition, I thought, an interesting approach to hospitality. I'm curious about your approach to hospitality and how how it has changed or been forced to change by how your customers have changed? How much have you had to adapt to where customers are at now in 2024?
I'm not sure. I don't know. This is probably such a non-answer, but like our guests are so cool. They put themselves in our hands and are like willing to, for the most part, you know, I mean, there's always an exception, but they 99% of them come in, kind of understand what we're all about, which I'm not even sure if I would understand what we're all about if I stepped through the door. I remember I used to live by the old St. Jack on Clinton Street. And I remember walking by, it was my first spot. I lived there for 10 years at 20th and Division. And I remember walking by and thinking it was so fucking cool. And I didn't even know which door to go in. And like, I had no idea like how to even approach this place. And I didn't for a long time. And I think if I stepped into our place, I mean, I'm not sure, you know, I would hope that I'd think that it's cool, but I certainly think I'd feel disoriented. But most of the people who step in ready to be just taken care of and understand it right away. And that's sweet. It's you know, it makes it so that we can just focus on what we're doing, which is trying to take care of them and give them like a little respite. Like, life's fucking hard, man. And people, like, I think I have I'm stuck in the weeds day to day. I know that there are like so many other people who are stuck in the weeds of their day-to-day life. You know, so much more with so many other big issues, that to offer people a little bit of casual humanity and a nice product is just what we try to do. Obviously, 2024 is kind of we're in a funny spot, I think, in Portland. I think, you know, we've seen a lot of the pre-pandemic growth of the city kind of plateau at best, you know, kind of backslide if we're being realistic. And I think that's a double-edged sword, personally. I think that a lot of the growth we saw in like 2018 and 2019, though great in many ways, kind of felt fast after a while, and especially coming from the Bay Area and seeing how San Francisco grew through the early aughts and became, unfortunately, plastic in some ways. I love the city, but you know, there are certain aspects to be a bit critical of. That I feel like the hard stop of the pandemic wasn't the worst thing in the world, but at the same time, we need people to show up. We need people to have enough money to feel comfortable spending it, and that can be a tricky thing right now. Luckily for us, we haven't. I don't think we've seen much in terms of like an adverse effect in what we're doing. Always trying to bring more people through the door, but at the same time, you know, we're not trying to change what we do. I think for me, in terms of hospitality, maybe this is just repeating myself, but like I worked at Row back when Row was on Division Street for a while, and that was fun and cool, and I loved that sense of anticipating people's needs and concerns before they even registered them, which was something that I think I was lucky enough to hone there. I think it's something that I grew up with to a certain degree. My family wouldn't wouldn't host people too often, but when they did, it was very much expected that that my sister and I play an active role in hosting, and that was just not even like manners. I mean, manners maybe played a part of it, but like just how you act around other people. And so it was cool to take that to a formal setting with like a tasting menu and like where there are all these cues that you hit. I like to do that sort of thing here, but without the fussiness. Not to say Roe was overly fussy, but again, like stripping away all what can feel like fluff sometimes. And just like distill it down to the roots of that hospitality. Like, not even like, yeah, it's not even manners. It's just how you treat people, you know? People who are showing up kindly to enjoy themselves with you.
It's like jazz hospitality.
Yeah.
Taking away all the pretend.
Right.
Free-forming it.
Yeah, for sure,
okay.
For sure.
So tell me let's talk about the place first and the future of the place. What is to come here? What have you not done that you want to do? What are kind of future hopes, dreams, ambitions for the space?
We want to start using the big event space more, and having some more like bigger types of events and parties that we manage as opposed to the Cooper's team when they're not using it, which should be fun. To throw our flair on bigger events like that. I'm always wary of that sort of thing personally, but Joel's always quite bullish about it, and so it's if nothing else fun to think about what we can do with our style of service in that setting. Right now we're in a transition in the kitchen, so we don't have time to think about some of those big picture things. But that's one thing that we hope to get back to soon. More winemakers come through, show what they do, is very much essential to being our sort of establishment. Portland has a very unique relationship with the valley, being so close as a commercial center to a world-class wine production region. So even though we're European focused, making sure that we give the people who essentially make this place what it is time and a spot to really show off their hard work, because God knows that's what we're here for. So those are the first two things that come to mind. We'll probably have some DJs come through at some point, get some dancing going if we have the chance and the energy. But other than that, stick to the day-to-day right now. So
you bring up the organ industry, and obviously not the focus of the shop, but clearly you have familiarity with the organ industry and appreciation for it. So tell me about, you talked kind of about your initial impressions of it. Tell me about how it's changed, how you've seen Oregon wine industry change, and sort of where it is right now, where it might be going.
Seem to be more Californians kicking around, and maybe more like fully funded projects happening and stuff like that, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. Everyone seems to understand the program when they come to Oregon, that like you can't think that you're just going to run the place. You gotta work with the community. I think I hope I'm not being overly generous to say I think most thoughtful winemakers look at things that way in the first place and think about the stewardship of the land and how to work within a community. But having come from the Bay Area and first getting into wine down there in the mid-aughts, that, bopping out to like Napa always felt a little too much like wine Disneyland. So I have a little bit of an aversion for that sort of thing. I don't think it's anything that we really have to worry about, but you do see, more fully funded programs up here. I like to see the cool projects that are being done by small producers in the Gorge right now, like Yuri Poberai, Bethany Kimmel. What they're doing up in White Salmon is super is cool. It's exciting. In many ways, I like what's that focus has shifted up there to a certain extent, and that the focus in the valley has really kind of been drawn more toward Eola Amity. I think that's there's good reason for that. Not to disparage the rest of the valley, but it's cool to see how that focus has really, I think, expanded like what people think about Oregon production in general, and then Southern Oregon too seems to still steadily be kind of building, both in terms of reputation and quality. Yeah. And I hope that we don't have too many fires in any of these regions. And being a Californian, that shit scares me. During the pandemic, I was selling, not to get off on a tangent, but I was selling kegs for Coopers, and lost that job because there were no parties to use kegs for at that point. But Joel was looking out for me, and he found he and one of the other Cooper's partners, Phil Kramer of Alex Ellie Vineyard, whom I knew well at that point, kind of settled me up there doing vineyard work at Alex Ellie for that season, essentially.
That's in like Mosier?
No, excuse me. It's south of Molalla.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wrong vineyard.
Right off the 213. He has 40 plus acres, roughly 15 of which are planted to vine, 5 different varieties, own rooted. It's honestly a cool space. It's a cool spot. But it was 2020, so like I was kind of relishing the fact that I was able to work outside, talk to no one. Like I would see Phil for about 10 minutes every morning. He'd give me, whatever I needed to do, and then I'd kick off to do some substantial labor in the vineyards in the heat, no less, which was a lot of fun. I kind of relish in doing that sort of work. I don't think I did it especially well, and it was kind of him to allow me to keep doing it, but it really felt like a godsend that year. And we were, there was a lot of stuff going on in the city, so it was also nice to get out of the city and just like be there with the vines and all the little critters that were kicking around. But then when the fires came in, it was right before harvest. It was a heartbreak to say the least. I was gathering clusters to take brick samples when the fires were coming in, and the Riverside fire was only like 3 miles away. And I was out in like a far corner of the vineyard, and he had to evacuate his family and come find me essentially. But like in the meantime, the smoke was just like coming in to the vineyard in a fairly scary way at that point. So I hightailed it out of there, and and it was heartbreaking, really heartbreaking. I mean, that's one story among many, and people obviously lost a lot more than their little respite from the 2020 chaos that year. So I don't mean to make too big of a deal out of my experience of it, but just to say that like it really is frightening to see the way that those things can affect the land and all of the people who are trying to tend to the land. And I hope that we're able to figure out better ways to deal with that. Yeah. Though I don't know what that would be. Things are warming up.
Geodesic dome, perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah.
We talked about the kind of the future for the shop. What's next for you? What are you looking ahead to, both either professionally, personally?
Yeah.
Anything on the horizon for you?
Frankly, no, and I hate to disappoint. I don't have like any projects in the queue. My project right now is to focus on what we're doing here, and to make sure that if and when I ever do leave this space, that it's that hopefully I've helped it get on sturdy feet and just build a good program, and that's my focus right now. I often think about like different things I could do, and there are small opportunities here and there to have a little fun with wine in other ways, but that's not my focus right now.
And last question for you, what's your greatest achievement? What are you proudest of so far?
Just that so many people are interested in what we're doing here, honestly. We have people come in from all over the country sometimes, asking me questions like, what we hear that this place is special, what makes it so special. It's like, shit, man, I I've been telling you, I think it's just we're trying to serve cool wine and cool food and play cool music and keep our heads in the game and keep people interested in that, but without making it forced in any way. So though I don't think that it's obviously not a specific, I wish I had a sale or something I could give you, the time I sold that 89 Costa Rica or something like that. But it's it feels more more just garnering interest in the space where we all are working incredibly hard. Yeah. I hope that's not anticlimactic, but that really is the where my head's at.
It's not the time you ran into the burning building to save the baby.
Yeah.
That's okay.
No. I had to be rescued from the smoky vineyard, as opposed to all of that.
That's all the questions that I have for you.
Thank you.
Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to cover today?
I think it's really cool. I mean, that you do this, that your team does this. I think Oregon deserves it, and that there's so many. I was blown away that you wanted to talk to me in the first place, because it seems like there's so many creative and well-spoken and very well-informed people who are just making this community incredibly vibrant. And I mean, we touched on this before we got the camera rolling, but so much of that is happening right now, and so much of the foundation for what's happening right now has been so beautifully set by generations of people now, that it's incredible to chronicle that, and very important, I'm sure, to chronicle it the way that you guys have. So. Cheers to you guys. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. And thank you for being part of it. We appreciate you sharing your story, sharing your space on this beautiful day. A little slice of life of Portland here for everybody who hasn't been. So thank you again. We'll let you off the hook.
Thank you.
Thank you.